Hi everybody, thanks for coming back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. So today I thought it might be useful if I go over what is peel. Now some of you might be thinking, well, I doubt it if you clicked on this video, but you may think, oh, everybody knows what peel is, but actually they don't. So when I was younger, which, at this stage was a while ago when I was in school, if we're being honest, peel was slightly new. So it used to be P, whereas they added the L. And I remember in English that was something that was sort of a bit newer, at least in my school. Now, obviously, peel is something that people tend to use across the board. So some people might still be confused as to what it is, though. So it basically makes up these four parts. So our first bit is point. So your point is where you introduce what you're saying. So, for example, say it's an agree or disagree question. Your point would be that you agree or that you disagree. The next section is evidence, or some people say example. So I say evidence because in history it is evidence, but if you wanted to maybe simplify or just use a different word, example is also fine. So this is where you would say, for example, XYZ. So this would then support your point. So let's say in history we're doing, medicine through time, and I say that I agree that Vesalius changed attitudes during the time. Sorry, I'm just freestyling this. So my evidence for that would be that because he dissected bodies, which was a new thing in the Renaissance period, that then led to empirical physical proof of what he was saying, and later was published in his book. But obviously, my explain section is different to my evidence. So your point is fairly short. Your example is also fairly short because you're then going to explain how your evidence supports your point. So I would say in that example I've given, my point would be that I would say, I don't know, I agree Vesalius was the biggest sort of change maker or whatever. And then my evidence would be that, for example, he dissected bodies of deceased criminals, and then in my explanation I would say that why this changed attitudes, that it provides physical proof, and then go on to talk about, perhaps if I was top tier student, I would give another piece of evidence. I'd say another example would be that this was then published, and then I'd explain that was brand new and that the church didn't have as much influence and so on. Now, link is the point that most people struggle with. This can vary. I know some teachers who are, very big on doing quite a large link back, but then I also know teachers that just want a sentence. So for me, what I like to make sure students are doing is answering the question, which seems obvious, but trust me, they don't always. So your point should technically answer your question, but the link back is linking back to the question. So you're basically coming back to your main point and you're saying, so therefore, in my example, so therefore Vesalius was the biggest change maker in the Renaissance period, for example. So I always say use the language of the question because that is what examiners like to see. So I've come up with an example question here because I'm going to try and help write an answer for you to give you an idea of where to begin. So explain the biggest reason for change in attitudes towards medicine from 1250 to 1700. Now, this could be a sort of, you could say whatever you think fits here, really. But for argument's sake, I'm just going to keep it simple. So my point then, I'm going to highlight in yellow. So what I want to do here is say what I think was the biggest reason for change in attitudes towards medicine. So I need to pick a time period from the, era given. So it's given me from Middle Ages to the Renaissance or the end of the Renaissance period. So explain the biggest reason for change in attitudes. So my example might be the biggest change in attitudes. Sorry, I can't spell. Attitudes towards medicine occurred in the biggest change in attitudes towards medicine occurred. We'll go for Should we go for the printing press? Should we go for the microscope? Let's go for the Black Death, because in Edexcel that's the case study. So the biggest change in attitude towards medicine occurred after the Black Death in 1348. So that's my point, which I'll highlight in yellow in a second. So this is because, so this is my example now. So this is because the church could not provide sufficient explanation for why the plague was had happened and why people were dying despite asking God for forgiveness, let's say. I don't know, I'm freestyling this at this point. So we'll highlight my point in yellow. So this is because the church cannot provide sufficient explanation for why the plague had happened and why people were dying despite asking God for forgiveness. So now I'd like to explain this a little bit more. So the plague, and we want to use language again, so Black Death, because obviously we have the Great Plague much later on, so we want to keep using Black Death. So the Black Death was treated with preventions and treatments commonly used in 1250 to, no, I don't want to say the dates actually, commonly used in the Middle Ages to treat to counteract disease. However, such as, I should give an example, such as bloodletting to rebalance the four humours, a theory put forward by Hippocrates and later developed on by Galen. So the Black Death treatment, prevention treatments commonly used in the Middle Ages to counteract disease such as bloodletting to rebalance the four humours, a theory put forward by Hippocrates and later developed by Galen. This treatment was one of many that was supposed to cure the disease present. However, this was unsuccessful in regards to the Black Death epidemic in 1348 and left many people questioning the church and medical knowledge they had at the time. So with this, you would want to probably add more here depending on how many marks the question is. However, I didn't mean to do that. However, what I would say is at this point, I'm just going to leave it here because I'm not just going to keep writing because I don't know how many marks this is. It says explain, so it's probably an 8-mark question. I've made this question up, by the way, just now. So it said explain the biggest reason for change in attitudes. So the biggest change in attitudes towards medicine occurred after the Black Death. So I've given a case study and I've used the language of the question. So this is because the church could not provide sufficient explanation for why the plague had happened and why people were dying despite asking God for forgiveness. So I've given an example of it couldn't be explained. They were asking God for forgiveness. So I've gone on to explain this. So the Black Death was treated with preventions and treatments commonly used in the Middle Ages. I should say in the Middle Ages to counteract disease such as bloodletting to rebalance the four humours, a theory put forward by Hippocrates and later developed on by Galen. This treatment was one of many that was supposed to cure the disease present. However, this was unsuccessful in regards to the Black Death epidemic in 1348 and left many people questioning the church and medical knowledge they had at the time. And then you could say this led to a change in attitudes towards both the church and medicine from the late 14th century onwards and enabled people to start questioning and researching medicine more in the future. Yeah, so that could be my link back if you like. So we'll do that in pink. So this is what it should really sort of look like. So obviously this is a very freestyled rough draft, but what I'm trying to do with this, so you might think, oh, this answer's rubbish. If you do, that's fine, I totally get it. However, what I have done is, and this does work, is I structured my answer, but I've highlighted the structure, which is the bit that I'm trying to get across to you today. So a lot of people struggle with the structure of the answer. So my key top tips are to ensure that you're focusing on one point at a time. So don't rush to talk about multiple points at once. Just talk about one per paragraph. And make sure that you're using the language of the question. So it's asked you the biggest reason for changing attitudes towards medicine. So I've said that, I think, more than once. So biggest change in attitudes towards medicine. And then again at the end, change in attitudes towards both the church and medicine. So I'm saying it again, I'm showing that I'm answering the question. Yeah. Also, I have included a date, which I know dates are really tricky for a lot of people, and I fully understand that. So my biggest advice in terms of memorising dates, so for this particular example, I've gone for the Edexcel Medicine Through Time board. So for me, key dates that I like to try and remember are the Black Death in 1348, because that's the case study. I like to remember the printing press in 1440, because that's quite universal in terms of explanation. The microscope, 1590s. So that one, again, could be quite useful. I want to say 1595, but that would be embarrassing if I got that wrong just now. But I'm trying to remember all the dates I can think of. And then obviously the biggest one, I think, is germ theory in 1861. So I would probably choose, obviously you've got the Great Plague as well, 1665, Great Fire London, 1666, the NHS, 1948. So you could literally pick multiple from each era just to remember, so that you've got maybe 2 or 3 per period of time. So that's what I would recommend. I hope that this maybe made a bit more sense of what Peel is. This does look different in different subjects, though it can do. See, this is just a historical perspective. So yeah, I hope that helped. If not, sorry. But hopefully my other videos might help you. Okay, take care. Thank you for watching. Bye.